And right now we're looking at the issue of energy. Sean Evers of Gulf Intelligence with us in the studio. Also James McCallum of Cenergy. Sean, number of issues raised at the event you hosted earlier on this week, the Energy Markets Forum. One of them was piracy. Piracy on the high seas and the hijacking of oil tankers. Quite a bit of concern about this. Any solutions proposed that you thought were viable?
Well, I thought one of the encouraging things what we had as one of our featured guests, the CEO of Abu Dhabi of ADNOC shipping company, who has obviously with more than 20 ships, tankers, and out on the high seas every day of the week. They know they're at the front edge of this challenge, and one of their tankers was actually boarded and attempted hijack on it a little over a year ago, and those pirates were captured by Abu Dhabi forces, special forces, and were brought to trial in Abu Dhabi and sentenced to 10 years in prison earlier this year. So they're very much at the coalface of it. What I thought was somewhat encouraging from what Dr. Ali Al-Yabouni said, that the problem has eased off a bit. The scale and number of incidents have come off without necessarily any obvious reason why that is. But he still was punctuating that it remains a very, very big challenge and big problem to shipping companies with increased costs on insurance and security and all sorts of things required, and very much made the point that complacency on this issue should not be, that the quieter period we're going to right now should not become one where one thinks the problem is solved.
Let's talk about Fujairah. Most of us living in Dubai think of it as a place to go diving for the weekend or a little bit of R&R from the stresses and strains of life in the city. But interesting comments from Chris Baker, Vittel, one of the world's biggest energy trading companies, talking about Fujairah as an emerging global energy hub.
Yeah, Chris made the point that with now about 1.5 million barrels of oil a day going into Fujairah through the Abu Dhabi Fujairah pipeline, and with about 8 million barrels of storage there, it's handling close to 1.5% of the world's daily production through that pipeline, and 8 million barrels of storage. That's a significant reserve. If you couple that with, of course, Oman, then the numbers get even larger. There is quite clearly a real importance in Fujairah positioning itself as it does. In a much safer way of actually exporting hydrocarbons, getting round the issue of some of the challenges around the straits at the top of the Gulf here. The other thing which Chris Bake said, which I thought was really interesting, linking back to your pirate point, is transporting oil through a pipeline is not only safer from the point of view that pirates don't generally tend to attack pipelines, but it's also an environmentally efficient way of actually transporting hydrocarbons. So in every sense, Fujairah is a great part of that story. There was another discussion which I thought was important that cropped up is as Fujairah does indeed become that energy hub, what are we doing in terms of security? How are we protecting that energy hub from the future? So Chris's points, very, very good, real expansion potential up there, and a lot of companies, private companies, investing. So
one of the points that was also made at the forum was now that there is the Abu Dhabi Fujairah oil pipeline, why not have a pipeline bringing oil in from other places? The logic of that, and particularly from Iraq, Iraq really struggles with its export constraints, given that it's right at the top of the Gulf with a very small coastline, and that bringing a pipeline from Iraq down to Fujairah, of course, unfortunately,
that would be one heck of a pipeline.
Well, you see it in other parts of the world. 1,000-kilometer pipelines are not that unusual. We saw from Central Asia through to Turkey, it's more than 1,000-kilometer pipeline. The fortunate thing they've only got to cross one or maybe two borders. In this neighborhood, there's a few more, but the logic is clearly a sensible one, and it was interesting because somebody tweeted that piece of information that the idea of an Iraqi oil pipeline down to the Indian Ocean makes perfect sense, and the Iraqi government retweeted it to their database of 10,000 people. So that was kind of interesting that they picked up on it within a few minutes and were at least open enough to share the tweet. I don't know about to share the idea, but they did. So that was kind of an interesting little sidebar.
James, One of the other issues that was raised, and I know you had strong opinions on this, was the issue of the United States becoming self-sufficient in oil. Sean, you raised this point and asked this question, didn't you, with shale in particular in the United States, potentially an absolute game changer over the next decade. If America becomes self-sufficient in oil, what does it mean for the oil price? What does it mean for the Gulf states, for whom the United States is a big buyer of oil? Where does it leave us, James?
Well, I think in many ways it brings us back to where we started our chat earlier on today, which is that, you know, historically, the Middle East here has looked west, and indeed the conference sort of anchored itself around the sense that we're increasingly looking east from this part of the world. The United States potentially self-sufficient in hydrocarbons is a huge story on many levels. It has to be said, you know, that the technology to develop shale oil, shale gas, still very much in its infancy. But if you know, the industry is used to overcoming technology challenges, and undoubtedly it will with time overcome those challenges. Fracking is still a big issue for many places and states within the United States, as it is in Central Europe.
In 30 seconds, just remind us what fracking is.
You know, basically the way that one extracts the gas or oil from shale is basically to pump up the pressure in the reservoir, frack the rock, releasing the gas to come up to the surface under pressure. And the same is true of oil. I think for me, the big question is that with a self-sufficient United States, what happens in terms of the supply regime of the Middle East, which has historically been a major supplier into the United States? What does it mean for United States foreign policy going forward in a world where it doesn't actually have to secure security of supply, you know, from areas such as the Middle East and around the world? The other big part of that story, of course, is also the emergence of China. China building its security of supply into the region here, down into Africa. You know, certainly self-sufficiency of the United States, one big story. You know, China moving increasingly to secure its supplies from East and West Africa is the second big story. And
China was unveiled its first aircraft carrier yesterday, which was, I thought, an interesting sidebar story to its intention to project its own presence into the high seas, so that and increasingly the need to maybe do that, if, as James is indicating, that, you know, when you remove the requirement from the US side to secure the energy fields of the world, if you like, then what does that mean? And that is a big game changer if indeed that does transpire to be the case.
Listen, Jez, we're going to have to leave the rest of that discussion for another time because we are out of time. It's been a great pleasure talking to both of you. First of all, to James McCallum, Chief Executive of Cenergy. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure.
And also Sean Evers, Managing Partner of Gulf Intelligence. Thanks indeed for your time.
Cheers, Richard.